My daughter-in-law stood up at our family dinner, raised her champagne glass, and announced to everyone, "Here's to Margaret, always hungry for attention and free food." The whole table erupted in laughter. I reached for my purse, pulled out my business cards, and slid one across to her. "Actually, Sarah, I'm hungry for a new head of sales. You're fired. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. My name is Margaret Whitman. I'm 73 years old, and until 3 hours ago, most people thought I was just another lonely widow living off Social Security. What they didn't know was that I own 67% of the company my daughter-in-law thought she was conquering. It all started when my son David met Sarah 5 years ago. She was working as a junior sales rep at Thompson Marketing, fresh out of business school with an MBA and enough ambition to power a small city. David was smitten from day one. She was everything he thought he wanted. Beautiful, driven, successful, or so we all believed. "Mom, you'll love Sarah," he told me over coffee that first week. "She's got this incredible business sense. She just became the top salesperson at her company." I smiled and nodded, genuinely happy for his happiness. After losing his father to cancer 2 years earlier, David deserved some joy. The first time I met Sarah, she arrived at my modest suburban home in a designer suit, checking her phone constantly and making comments about the cute little neighborhood. She was polite enough, but I caught her rolling her eyes when David mentioned that I volunteered at the community center. "That's sweet," she said with a condescending smile. "Everyone needs hobbies." What she didn't know was that I'd been running a successful consulting firm for 40 years. Whitman Strategic Solutions had helped over 200 businesses increase their profits, streamline operations, and navigate complex market challenges. We were small, efficient, and extremely profitable. When David and Sarah got engaged after 2 years of dating, she insisted on having the wedding at the country club. "David deserves the best," she announced, as if I might argue. I wrote the check without complaint, happy to see my son marry someone he loved. The problems started almost immediately. Sarah had opinions about everything: my clothes, my car, my furniture. She'd make little comments during family dinners about how I needed to get with the times or try harder with my appearance. David would laugh nervously and change the subject. "Maybe we should get you a smartphone, Mom," Sarah suggested one Thanksgiving. "It might help you stay connected to the modern world." The way she said it made me sound like I was living in a cave, but I bit my tongue. David was happy, and that mattered more than my pride. 2 years into their marriage, Sarah landed what she called her dream job as head of sales at Preston Industries, a mid-sized consulting firm. She couldn't stop bragging about it. Every conversation included updates about her commission checks, her new office, or her plans to revolutionize their entire sales strategy. "I'm going to turn that place around," she declared at our monthly family dinner. "Their current sales team doesn't know what they're doing. I'll probably be running the whole company within 5 years. That's when I realized exactly which company she was talking about. Preston Industries wasn't just any consulting firm. It was my biggest competitor. And if Sarah was now their head of sales, things were about to get very interesting indeed. Sarah's success at Preston Industries became the only topic of conversation at our family gatherings. Every month brought new stories of her achievements, each one delivered with increasing arrogance. "I closed the Henderson account last week," she announced during Sunday dinner, cutting into her steak with theatrical precision. "Biggest sale in company history. They said it couldn't be done, but I made it happen." David beamed with pride. "Tell Mom about the bonus." $50,000, Sarah said, watching my face carefully for a reaction. "Cash. Plus, they're giving me a company car and talking about profit sharing." She leaned back in her chair, savoring what she clearly thought was my amazement. What she was actually seeing was my calculation. The Henderson account. I'd been courting them for 3 years. My team had done all the groundwork, built the relationship, identified their needs. Preston had swooped in at the last minute with an aggressive bid and stolen the contract. "That's wonderful, dear," I said, refilling my water glass. "Competition keeps everyone sharp." Sarah's smile faltered slightly. She'd been expecting more enthusiasm, maybe some questions about how she'd managed such a coup. Instead, I'd treated it like news about the weather. Over the next few months, Sarah's stories became more elaborate. She was single-handedly transforming Preston's entire operation. She'd recruited new clients, redesigned their sales process, and was being considered for a partnership track. "The other sales reps hate me, of course," she said with obvious satisfaction. "They're jealous because I'm showing them how it's really done. Old-school methods don't work anymore." I nodded politely, but inside I was keeping score. 3 major clients had left my company for Preston in the past 6 months. Each time, the pattern was the same. Sarah would approach them with inside information about their operations. Information that could only have come from someone who understood their business intimately. The problem was, I'd never told anyone outside my company about these clients' specific challenges, which meant Sarah was either incredibly gifted at research, or she was getting help from someone with access to confidential information. "Mom, you should ask Sarah for business advice," David suggested one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "She really knows this stuff. Maybe she could help you with your volunteer work." Sarah laughed, a sound like ice cubes clinking in a glass. "David, your mother's community center projects are sweet, but they're not exactly high-stakes business. I deal with million-dollar contracts and complex negotiations. It's a different world." That's when I decided it was time to do some research of my own. I called my attorney, Marcus Whitman, no relation, despite sharing a last name, and asked him to look into Preston Industries' recent activities. Marcus had been handling my legal affairs for 15 years and knew how to be discreet. "What exactly are you looking for, Margaret?" he asked. "I want to know how they're winning contracts that should have been ours," I said. "And I want to know if there's any pattern to their new business." The report came back 2 weeks later, and it confirmed my suspicions. Every major client Preston had stolen was someone I'd had preliminary discussions with. Somehow they were getting information about my strategies, my pricing, and my clients' specific requirements. But here's what Sarah didn't know about those preliminary discussions. I'd never actually wanted those particular contracts. They were too small, too complicated, or had too many red flags for profitability. I'd been using them as decoys while I pursued the clients I actually wanted. So while Sarah thought she was outmaneuvering me, she was actually helping me eliminate problem accounts while I focused on the profitable ones. Preston Industries was taking on all the headaches while Whitman's strategic solutions kept the cream. It would have been brilliant strategy, if only I'd planned it that way. The invitation to David and Sarah's 5th wedding anniversary party arrived on embossed cardstock with gold lettering. "An evening of celebration at the Riverside Country Club," it announced. "Cocktails, dinner, and dancing to honor our journey together." I RSVP'd, yes, naturally, though something about the whole thing felt performative. Sarah had been planning this party for months, treating it like a corporate merger announcement rather than a celebration of marriage. "It's going to be perfect," she told me over lunch the week before. "I've invited everyone important. All the partners from Preston, the mayor, the Chamber of Commerce president. This is really about networking as much as celebrating." Of course it was. Everything with Sarah was about networking. The party was exactly what I'd expected. Elegant, expensive, and designed to impress. Sarah had chosen a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and she worked the room like a politician running for office. "Margaret!" She appeared at my elbow with a practiced smile. "I'm so glad you could make it. You remember the Hendersons, don't you? From the account I mentioned?" I did indeed remember the Hendersons. Jim Henderson stepped forward with an embarrassed expression. "Mrs. Whitman, I hope there are no hard feelings about the contract. Business is business, you understand." "Of course," I said pleasantly. "I hope Preston is meeting all your expectations." Jim's smile became forced. "Well, there have been some challenges with implementation. More complicated than we were led to believe." Sarah's laugh was a little too bright. "Jim's just perfectionist. We'll work through any little issues." After they walked away, I found myself genuinely curious about what little issues meant. In my experience, when clients used that phrase, they were usually facing much bigger problems than they wanted to admit. The dinner portion of the evening featured speeches from several of David and Sarah's friends, each one praising Sarah's business acumen and David's success at his marketing firm. Sarah glowed under the attention, raising her glass to acknowledge each compliment. Then came David's speech about his incredible wife and her amazing career achievements. He talked about her rise at Preston Industries, her record-breaking sales figures, and her plans for the future. Sarah doesn't just work in business, David said, his voice filled with pride. She is business. She's taught me so much about strategy and negotiation. She's going to be running her own company someday. The room erupted in applause. Sarah stood up to take a bow, and I could see the calculation behind her smile. This wasn't just a party. It was a campaign event for her professional ambitions. But then, something interesting happened. During the mingling after dinner, I overheard a conversation between two Preston Industries partners near the bar. "How's the Henderson situation developing?" one asked quietly. "Disaster," the other replied. "They're threatening to terminate early. Sarah promised them results we can't possibly deliver with their budget. The whole thing was oversold. That's the third account this quarter. Management's starting to ask questions." They noticed me nearby and quickly changed the subject. But I'd heard enough. Sarah's record-breaking sales were beginning to show cracks. Later, as the party wound down, Sarah cornered me near the coat check. "Margaret, I've been thinking. You've been managing that little consulting business of yours for so long. Maybe it's time to consider retirement? I could help you find someone to take it over." Her tone was concerned, almost motherly, but her eyes held something else entirely. "That's very thoughtful," I said, retrieving my coat. "I'll certainly give it some consideration." As I drove home that night, I realized Sarah wasn't just competitive. She was actively trying to eliminate competition. The question was, how far was she willing to go? The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports. Marcus's voice was carefully neutral, which usually meant bad news. "Margaret, we need to talk. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" 2 hours later, I was sitting across from Marcus's mahogany desk while he laid out a series of documents that made my blood run cold. "Someone has been making inquiries about acquiring Whitman Strategic Solutions," he said. "Very specific inquiries about your client list, your assets, and your succession plans." I picked up the top document, a formal letter of intent from Preston Industries, offering to purchase my company for what they termed fair market value. The number they'd proposed was insultingly low. "When did this arrive?" I asked. "Yesterday. But Margaret, that's not the interesting part." Marcus pulled out another file. "The inquiry came with detailed information about your business that they shouldn't have had access to. Client names, contract values, even your overhead expenses. Someone had been feeding Preston Industries confidential information about my company. Someone with intimate access to my operations. The timing is suspicious too," Marcus continued. "This offer came just days after several of your long-term clients received unsolicited proposals from Preston for services identical to what you've been providing them." My hands were steady as I reviewed the documents. But inside, I felt a familiar anger building. The same anger I'd felt when my husband was being undermined by office politics in his final years. The same anger that had driven me to build my own business rather than trust anyone else to value my work properly. "What's our next move?" I asked. "First, we decline their offer. Then we figure out where they're getting their information." Marcus leaned forward. "Margaret, I have to ask, is there anyone in your organization who might have reason to share confidential information?" I thought about my small but loyal team. Janet, who'd been my office manager for 12 years. Robert and Linda, my senior consultants, who'd built their careers alongside mine. None of them had any reason to betray the company that had provided their livelihoods. But then I remembered Sarah's recent interest in my little consulting business, her suggestions about retirement, her detailed questions about my client relationships during our family dinners. "I need you to investigate something," I told Marcus. "Quietly. I want to know if there's any connection between Preston Industries and someone in my family." Marcus's eyebrows rose, but he simply nodded. "I'll have an answer for you by Friday." The rest of the week passed slowly. I went through the motions of running my business, meeting with clients and reviewing proposals. But part of my mind was constantly calculating possibilities and preparing for different scenarios. Friday afternoon, Marcus called. "Can you come in? I have information you need to see in person." This time, the documents on his desk told a story that was both predictable and infuriating. Financial records showed regular payments from Preston Industries to Sarah Wilson, my daughter-in-law, for consulting services dating back 8 months. "She's been working as their business intelligence consultant," Marcus explained. "Officially, it's all above board, But the timing of these payments corresponds exactly with Preston's successful bids on contracts that should have gone to your company. The betrayal was complete. Sarah had been systematically undermining my business while playing the devoted daughter-in-law at family dinners. She'd used her access to our family conversations to steal my clients and weaken my company, all while positioning herself as the successful businesswoman and me as the aging amateur. But Sarah had made one crucial error in her calculations. She assumed I was just a small-time consultant who'd stumbled into moderate success. She had no idea about the true scope of my business or the resources I had available. "Marcus," I said, setting down the financial records, "I need you to prepare some documents for me." It's time Sarah learned exactly who she's been playing games with. "What kind of documents?" I smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it was genuine. The kind that end games permanently. The next family dinner was scheduled for the following Sunday at David and Sarah's house, a sprawling colonial they'd bought in the upscale Meadowbrook neighborhood. As I drove through their tree-lined street, I reviewed my plan one final time. Sarah had been systematically betraying my business for almost a year, feeding information to Preston Industries that allowed them to steal my clients. What she didn't know was that Preston Industries wasn't just my competitor, they were one of my subsidiaries. I'd bought controlling interest in Preston 3 years ago when they were struggling financially, but I'd kept the acquisition quiet. It was simpler to let them operate independently while I gradually restructured their management and client base. Sarah's recent success had actually been funded by my own investment capital. The irony was delicious, but tonight was about more than irony. Tonight was about teaching my daughter-in-law that actions have consequences. I parked behind David's BMW and gathered my purse, checking to make sure the documents were still inside. Everything I needed to end Sarah's little game was folded neatly in a manila envelope. "Mom!" David opened the door with his usual enthusiasm. "Perfect timing! Sarah just opened a bottle of that wine you like." Sarah appeared in the hallway, impeccably dressed as always, her smile warm and welcoming. "Margaret, you look wonderful! Come in! Come in!" If I hadn't known about her betrayal, I would have believed her genuine pleasure at seeing me. Sarah was, I had to admit, an excellent actress. Dinner was Sarah's usual production. Expensive ingredients prepared with Instagram-worthy presentation. She'd clearly spent considerable time and money on the meal, which made sense given that it was being financed by the profits she was stealing from my company. "I have exciting news," Sarah announced as we finished the main course. "Preston Industries is expanding. They're opening a new division focused on strategic acquisitions, and they want me to head it up." David beamed. "That's incredible. Tell Mom about the salary increase. 200,000 base, plus performance bonuses." Sarah couldn't hide her satisfaction. "They say I have a natural talent for identifying undervalued companies and finding ways to acquire them profitably." I nodded approvingly. "That does sound like quite an opportunity. What's your first target acquisition?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "Well, I probably shouldn't say too much, but there's this small consulting firm that would be perfect for our expansion plans. The owner is getting older, probably ready to retire, and they have some valuable client relationships we could leverage." "Fascinating," I said, setting down my wine glass. "Would I know the company?" "Whitman Strategic Solutions," Sarah said with obvious pride. "They think they're competing with us, but they're really just a mom-and-pop operation with outdated methods. Once we acquire them, we can modernize their client base and easily triple the revenue." David looked confused. "Wait, isn't that—" "Yes," I said calmly, reaching into my purse for the manila envelope. "That's my company." The color drained from Sarah's face. "Your— what?" I pulled out the first document, Preston Industries corporate structure, with my name highlighted as majority shareholder. "I own 67% of Preston Industries." "Sarah, I have for 3 years." Sarah stared at the document as if it were written in a foreign language. "That's impossible. You volunteer at the community center." "I also run a multi-million-dollar consulting firm," I said pleasantly. "The same firm you've been trying to destroy while stealing a salary from my subsidiary company." David was looking back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match. "Mom, I don't understand. You never said you owned Preston Industries." It wasn't relevant until now. I pulled out the second document, the financial records Marcus had discovered. Sarah has been selling confidential information about Whitman Strategic to Preston for the past 8 months. Information she gathered during our family dinners. Sarah's hands were shaking as she reached for her wine glass. Margaret, you don't understand. This was just business strategy. I was trying to help Preston succeed. By betraying your own family? I asked. By stealing clients from the woman who paid for your wedding? The room went completely silent, except for the ticking of the antique clock in their dining room. Sarah's mask of competence had finally slipped, revealing the desperate ambition underneath. What happens now? David asked quietly. I smiled and reached for the third document. Now Sarah learns what happens when you try to steal from someone who actually knows how to play the game. I slid the termination letter across the table to Sarah, who was staring at it like it might burst into flames. Your employment with Preston Industries is terminated effective immediately, I said. Your access to company systems has been revoked, and your final paycheck will be adjusted to reflect the unauthorized disclosure of confidential information. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. You can't do this. I have a contract. I have rights. You have the right to legal representation, I replied calmly. I suggest you use it. Marcus has prepared a comprehensive file documenting your breach of fiduciary duty. Industrial espionage is a serious matter. David had been silent through most of this revelation, but now he found his voice. Mom, surely we can work something out. Sarah made a mistake, but she's family. I turned to look at my son, my only child, who I'd raised alone after his father died. David, family doesn't steal from family. Family doesn't lie and manipulate and betray trust. Sarah has been systematically undermining my business for months while pretending to care about my welfare. But she didn't know it was your company, David protested weakly. She knew she was stealing confidential information, I said. She knew she was betraying my trust. The only thing she didn't know was that she was incompetent at it. Sarah suddenly came alive, leaning forward with renewed energy. You think you've won, but you haven't. I have contacts throughout the industry. I know where all the bodies are buried. I can destroy Preston Industries' reputation with a few phone calls. The threat hung in the air between us. Sarah was showing her true colors now. No more pretense of family loyalty or business ethics. Just raw, desperate ambition. I reached into my purse one final time and pulled out a thick legal document. Sarah, meet your non-disclosure agreement, the one you signed when you started working for Preston. The one that specifically prohibits you from disparaging the company or revealing confidential information to competitors. Her face went white as she recognized her own signature on the document. Violation of this agreement carries a penalty of $5 million in damages, I continued, plus legal fees, plus potential criminal charges for industrial espionage. So please, make those phone calls. I'd love to see you try. Sarah slumped back in her chair, finally understanding the scope of her miscalculation. She'd been playing checkers while I was playing chess, and now she was seeing the board clearly for the first time. There's one more thing, I said, standing up and gathering my documents. David, I'm transferring my shares of Preston Industries to you. Consider it an early inheritance and a business education. David's mouth fell open. Mom, I don't know anything about running a consulting firm. You'll learn, and you'll have excellent teachers. Preston's current management team is very competent. They just needed better oversight. I looked pointedly at Sarah, which they'll definitely have now. As I walked toward the door, Sarah called after me. Margaret, wait, please. We can fix this. I'll apologize to the clients. I'll make restitution. Just don't destroy my career. I turned back to face her one last time. Sarah, your career was built on theft and deception. I'm not destroying it. I'm simply removing the stolen foundation it was built on. But what am I supposed to do now? I considered the question seriously. Here was a woman who'd spent months plotting against her own family, who'd stolen confidential information and betrayed every trust that had been placed in her. What she was supposed to do now was face the consequences of her choices. I suggest you find a new line of work, I said finally, preferably one that doesn't require trustworthiness. As I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, complete satisfaction. Sarah had tried to play me for a fool, assuming that age and kindness meant weakness. Instead, she'd learned that some games have rules she never bothered to understand. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. Preston's Monday board meeting confirmed. You'll be announced as active chairman. How does it feel to be back in charge? I smiled as I typed my response. Like I never left. The call came at 6 in the morning, 2 days after our explosive dinner. David's voice was strained, exhausted. Mom, Sarah's been up all night making phone calls. She's trying to contact every client Preston Industries has ever worked with. I sat up in bed, instantly alert. What exactly is she telling them? That you're mentally unstable. That you've somehow manipulated the company documents. That Preston Industries is being run by someone who doesn't understand modern business practices. David paused. Mom, she's also telling people that you stole the company from its rightful owners. I had to admire Sarah's desperation, if not her intelligence. She was essentially committing professional suicide while trying to take me down with her. David, has she contacted any lawyers yet? 3 that I know of. They all turned her down after reviewing her case. Apparently, industrial espionage isn't a popular cause among reputable firms. I smiled grimly as I started my coffee maker. What about the disreputable firms? That's what I'm worried about. Mom, I think she's going to try something drastic. Yesterday she mentioned something about exposing the truth and making sure everyone knows what really happened. What really happened was that Sarah had systematically betrayed her own family for 8 months while stealing from my company. But people in desperate situations rarely see their actions clearly. I need you to do something for me, I told David. Contact Marcus immediately and have him prepare an injunction. If Sarah violates her non-disclosure agreement, I want legal recourse ready before she finishes her first phone call. Already done. Marcus called me yesterday. He said something about playing offense instead of defense. I think he's enjoying this more than he should. Marcus had been my attorney for 15 years. And he'd seen too many people try to intimidate his clients with baseless threats. Sarah was about to discover that threats work both ways. By noon, Sarah had made her move. A local business reporter called Preston Industries, asking for comment on allegations of fraudulent ownership and elder abuse in the corporate succession. The allegations were laughably weak. Sarah had no documentation to support her claims and no credible witnesses to her version of events. But she'd managed to plant seeds of doubt that could damage Preston's reputation if not addressed quickly. I called an emergency board meeting for that afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, I addressed Preston's senior management team, many of whom were meeting me in person for the first time. You're all aware that we have a disgruntled former employee making false statements to the media. I want to assure you that these allegations are completely without merit. I distributed copies of the acquisition documents from 3 years ago, along with the financial records showing my investment in Preston's turnaround. As you can see, my ownership of this company is completely legitimate and well documented. What's not legitimate is Sarah Wilson's breach of her fiduciary duty and violation of her non-disclosure agreement. The management team reviewed the documents with the kind of thoroughness I appreciated. These were serious professionals who understood the difference between facts and desperate accusations. What's our response strategy? Asked Linda Patterson, Preston's operations director. Transparency and evidence, I replied. We're going to provide the media with complete documentation of Sarah's employment termination and the reasons behind it. We're also going to file a lawsuit for defamation and breach of contract. That seems aggressive, said Tom Chen, the marketing director. I leaned forward. Tom, when someone tries to destroy your reputation with lies, being aggressive isn't optional. It's survival. The meeting lasted 2 hours, and by the end, I had the full support of Preston's management team. More importantly, I had their respect. They'd expected to meet an elderly woman who'd stumbled into business ownership. Instead, they found someone who understood exactly how to fight back against corporate warfare. As I left the office that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started. S. I showed the message to Marcus when I got home. He read it twice, then smiled. Margaret, she just handed us our defamation case on a silver platter. Threatening messages from terminated employees don't look good in court. Good, I said. But Marcus, I have a feeling this is just the beginning. Sarah's not the type to accept defeat gracefully. I was right. By the next morning, Sarah had escalated her campaign in ways I hadn't anticipated. The article appeared in the Business Journal's online edition at 7 a.m. sharp. local consulting firm embroiled in family financial scandal. Sarah had somehow convinced a reporter that I was using my business to financially abuse my own family. The article was carefully worded to avoid direct libel, but the implications were clear. It suggested that I had manipulated my son and daughter-in-law into giving me access to confidential information, then used that access to destroy Sarah's career when she tried to protect other family members. "She's good," Marcus admitted grudgingly as we reviewed the article in his office. "This is exactly the kind of story that sounds plausible without requiring actual evidence." The article painted Sarah as a devoted daughter-in-law who had discovered irregularities in my business practices and was being persecuted for trying to expose them. It portrayed me as a manipulative elderly woman using family loyalty to cover up unethical behavior. "The real problem," Marcus continued, "is that this story appeals to people's preconceptions. Everyone loves a David versus Goliath narrative, especially when David is a young woman and Goliath is a wealthy older person." I stared out Marcus's office window at the busy downtown street below. "So how do we counter it?" "Evidence. Lots of evidence. And we need to be careful not to look like we're bullying a younger woman who's just trying to defend herself." That afternoon, David called me. His voice was different, cooler, more formal. "Mom, I need to ask you something directly. Did you set Sarah up? Did you deliberately put her in a position where she would access confidential information so you could use it against her later?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "David, you're asking if I planned for my daughter-in-law to betray me?" "I'm asking if any of this was real. The family dinners, the conversations about business. Were you using us to gather intelligence on Preston Industries?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of Sarah's strategy. She wasn't just attacking my business reputation. She was attacking my relationship with my son. She was making David question whether our family interactions had been genuine or calculated. "David, I want you to think about something. If I had been planning to manipulate Sarah, would I have been surprised when she started stealing my clients? Would I have needed Marcus to investigate where Preston was getting their information?" There was a long silence. "I don't know, Mom. Sarah says you're much more calculating than you've ever let on. Sarah says a lot of things. Most of them are lies designed to cover up her own actions. But some of them might be true," David said quietly. "You never told us about owning Preston Industries. You never mentioned how successful your consulting business really was. How many other secrets are you keeping?" That was the question I'd been dreading. Because David was right. I had kept secrets. Important secrets about the true scope of my success and the extent of my business empire. "David, I need you to come to my house tomorrow evening. There are things I need to show you, documents I need to explain. But I want you to understand something first. Every decision I've made has been to protect our family and ensure your future security." "That's what Sarah said too," David replied, about her decisions. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the photo of David's father that I kept on the windowsill. Thomas had always said that the truth was like surgery. It hurt, but it was necessary for healing. Tomorrow, David would learn the truth about everything, including the secret I'd been keeping for 25 years about how I'd actually built my business empire. The secret that would either restore his faith in me or destroy our relationship forever. David arrived at my house the next evening with the careful posture of someone who expected disappointment. He'd clearly been wrestling with Sarah's accusations all day, trying to reconcile the mother he thought he knew with the businesswoman who had systematically destroyed his wife's career. "Before we start," I said, leading him to the living room, "I want you to understand why I kept certain information private. It wasn't about deception. It was about protection." I'd spent the afternoon organizing documents chronologically, creating a timeline that would make sense of the past 25 years. David settled into his father's old chair while I arranged the papers on the coffee table between us. "It started when your father died," I began. "You were 23, just starting your career. I had a modest consulting business and about $50,000 in savings." David nodded. He remembered those early years after the funeral, the financial stress, the uncertainty about our future. "What you didn't know was that I'd also inherited something else from your father, a patent for a manufacturing process that he'd developed but never had time to commercialize." I showed him the first document, Thomas's original patent application from 1995. Your father was brilliant with industrial processes, but he was terrible with business development. He filed this patent and then forgot about it. What kind of process? David asked, examining the technical diagrams. A method for reducing waste in pharmaceutical manufacturing. It seemed minor at the time, but it became incredibly valuable when environmental regulations tightened in the early 2000s. The next document was a licensing agreement with a major pharmaceutical company. The royalty payments had started small, but had grown exponentially as more companies adopted Thomas's process. Within 5 years, I was earning more from patent royalties than from my consulting work, I continued. But I didn't tell you because I wanted you to build your own career, not depend on inherited wealth. David was studying the financial statements, his eyes widening as he saw the numbers. Mom, these royalty payments, they're enormous. $12 million over 15 years, I confirmed. I used that money to acquire struggling consulting firms, restructure them, and build what became a network of interconnected companies. I pulled out a corporate organizational chart that showed the full scope of my business empire. Preston Industries was just one piece of a puzzle that included 6 other companies across 3 states. This is why Sarah's betrayal was so ironic, I explained. She thought she was helping Preston compete against Whitman Strategic. She had no idea that her success at Preston was actually increasing my profits from both companies. David sat back in his chair, processing the scope of what I'd built. Why keep it secret? Why let people think you were just running a small consulting business? Because wealth changes how people treat you. It changes how family members approach you. I wanted our relationship to be genuine, not influenced by what you thought you might inherit. But Sarah figured it out somehow. I shook my head. Sarah never figured out anything. She was stealing information about Whitman Strategic's clients, but she had no idea about the parent company structure. Her intelligence gathering was limited to what she could overhear at family dinners. Then how did she know to target your clients specifically? That was the question I'd been hoping David wouldn't ask. Because the answer revealed the one part of this story that I wasn't proud of. David, I need to tell you about the conversations I had with Sarah during those family dinners. The questions I asked about her work, the interest I showed in her strategies. David's expression grew wary. What kind of questions? The kind designed to make her feel confident enough to reveal Preston's plans. The kind that encouraged her to share details about upcoming proposals and client presentations. The silence stretched between us as David realized what I was admitting. You were manipulating her from the beginning, he said quietly. I was protecting my business from someone who was already stealing from it. Sarah started gathering intelligence about my clients months before I began asking strategic questions. I was responding to her corporate espionage, not initiating it. But you could have just confronted her directly. You could have told me what she was doing. I looked at my son, my only child, who I'd raised to be honorable and trusting, and realized this was the moment our relationship would either survive or shatter. David, if I had told you that Sarah was betraying our family, would you have believed me? David's silence was answer enough. He wouldn't have believed me. He would have thought I was jealous of Sarah's success or threatened by her influence in his life. So instead of confronting the problem directly, you decided to manipulate both of us, he said finally. I decided to gather evidence, I corrected. Evidence that would be undeniable when the time came to act. By encouraging Sarah to commit more crimes? That stopped me short, because that's exactly what I had done, wasn't it? I'd encouraged Sarah to feel confident about her intelligence gathering, knowing that her overconfidence would eventually lead to mistakes that I could document. David, I need to show you one more thing. I pulled out the final folder, the one I'd hoped I wouldn't need to open. Something I discovered just yesterday that changes everything we think we know about Sarah's motivations. Inside the folder was a private investigator's report that Marcus had commissioned. What it revealed about Sarah's background was stunning. Sarah Wilson isn't who she claimed to be when you met her, I said, handing David the report. Her real name is Sarah Kellerman. She was fired from 3 previous jobs for corporate espionage and fraud. David's hands shook as he read the investigator's findings. Sarah had a history of targeting successful older men, gaining their trust, then systematically stealing from their employers or family businesses. She approached you deliberately, I continued, after researching our family and identifying me as the owner of a successful consulting business. Your relationship was never organic. It was a long-term con designed to gain access to my company. The report included photographs of Sarah with 2 previous targets, men in their 30s whose families had owned profitable businesses. In both cases, she'd married them, gained access to confidential information, then used that information to benefit competing companies. The wedding, the anniversary party, even her job at Preston Industries. It was all part of a plan to position herself to steal my company, I said. What she didn't anticipate was that I owned Preston too. David set down the report with trembling hands. How long have you known this? I suspected something was wrong 8 months ago when the pattern of lost clients became obvious, but I only confirmed her true identity yesterday. Yesterday? You've known for 1 day that my wife is a professional con artist, and you didn't tell me immediately? I met his eyes steadily. Because I knew it would destroy you, and because I wanted to handle it in a way that would protect you legally and financially. Protect me how? David, if Sarah is prosecuted for her crimes against my company, your marriage could be considered part of the conspiracy. You could lose everything. Your house, your business, your reputation. The color drained from David's face, but I didn't know anything about her plans. I know that, but prosecutors might see it differently, especially given how much confidential information Sarah had access to through our family conversations. David stood up abruptly and began pacing. So what are you saying? That I should stay married to someone who's been lying to me for 5 years to protect myself legally? I'm saying we need to be very careful about how we handle this. Sarah is dangerous in ways we're only beginning to understand. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. Margaret, we have a problem, he said without preamble. Sarah just filed a police report claiming that you've been financially abusing David and making threats against her safety. I put the phone on speaker so David could hear. What kind of threats? David asked. She claims Margaret has been using her position as David's mother to coerce him into revealing confidential information about his business associates. She also says Margaret threatened to have her arrested on false charges if she doesn't pay money to cover alleged damages to Margaret's company. David and I looked at each other across the living room. Sarah wasn't just fighting back. She was escalating to criminal accusations. Marcus, what does this mean legally? I asked. It means Sarah is trying to flip the narrative completely. Instead of being the perpetrator of corporate espionage, she wants to be the victim of elder abuse and extortion. David sank back into his chair. She's going to destroy all of us, isn't she? That's when I realized Sarah had made one final miscalculation. She was so focused on destroying my reputation that she'd forgotten about the one piece of evidence that would end her campaign permanently. Actually, I said, reaching for my phone, she just gave us exactly what we need to finish this. The next morning, I walked into the police station with Marcus, David, and a banker's box full of evidence. Detective Rodriguez had agreed to meet with us after reviewing Sarah's complaint, but I could tell from his expression that he was skeptical of all parties involved. Mrs. Whitman, he said, gesturing us into a conference room, your daughter-in-law has made some serious allegations. She claims you've been using your son to gather intelligence about her employer, then threatened her with prosecution when she tried to expose your activities. Detective Rodriguez, I said, settling into my chair. I'd like to play you a recording that I think will clarify the situation. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. 3 days ago, Sarah Wilson called me and left a voicemail. I'd like you to hear what she said. Sarah's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. Margaret, I know you think you've won, but you're wrong. I have enough information about your business practices to destroy you completely. Unless you reinstate my job at Preston Industries and pay me $2 million in damages, I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. You have 48 hours to decide. Detective Rodriguez's eyebrows rose. That sounds like extortion. It is extortion, Marcus confirmed. And it's just the beginning. I opened the banker's box and began arranging documents on the conference table. Detective, what I'm about to show you is a comprehensive record of corporate espionage, identity fraud, and criminal conspiracy spanning 5 years. The first stack of documents detailed Sarah's theft of confidential information from Whitman Strategic Solutions. The second stack showed her history of similar crimes under different identities. The third stack contained the private investigator's report about her systematic targeting of wealthy families. Sarah Kellerman, also known as Sarah Wilson, has been conducting a long-term fraud operation against my family, I explained. She researched our financial situation, manipulated my son into marriage, then spent 5 years gathering intelligence about my business to benefit competing companies. Detective Rodriguez examined the documents carefully. These are serious allegations, Mrs. Whitman. Do you have evidence that she knowingly committed these crimes? I have something better than evidence, I said. I have a confession. I pulled out my laptop and opened a video file. This is security camera footage from Preston Industries conference room, recorded 2 weeks ago during Sarah's exit interview. The video showed Sarah sitting across from Preston's HR director, clearly agitated and defensive. But what made it damning was the audio. Sarah admitting that she had deliberately gathered confidential information about Whitman's strategic and passed it to Preston's sales team. I did what I had to do to succeed, Sarah said on the recording. If Margaret was stupid enough to discuss business at family dinners, that was her mistake. I used every advantage I had access to, and I'd do it again. Detective Rodriguez paused the video. She's admitting to corporate espionage. She's admitting to much more than that, David said quietly. He'd been silent through most of the presentation, but now he pulled out his own phone. Detective, I have text messages from Sarah going back 3 years. Messages where she talks about managing my mother and extracting maximum value from our family relationship. The text messages were devastating. Sarah had been documenting her manipulation of our family like a research project, discussing strategies for gaining access to confidential information and plans for eventually taking control of my business assets. There's more, I said, pulling out the final document. Yesterday, Sarah attempted to transfer $500,000 from David's business account to an account in the Cayman Islands. The transfer was blocked by the bank's fraud prevention system, but the attempt was recorded. Detective Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. She was trying to steal money while filing a police report, claiming you were extorting her? Sarah Kellerman is a professional con artist who has spent 5 years systematically defrauding my family, I said. Her police report was a desperate attempt to create a false narrative that would allow her to escape prosecution. The detective studied the evidence for several more minutes, then looked up at David. Mr. Whitman, I have to ask, did you know about any of your wife's activities? No, David said firmly. I believed she was legitimately successful at Preston Industries. I had no idea she was stealing information from my mother or that she had a history of similar crimes. And Mrs. Whitman, why didn't you report these crimes earlier? I chose my words carefully, because I wanted to protect my son's marriage and reputation. I hoped Sarah could be redirected into legitimate success without destroying my family. I only decided to act when she escalated to extortion and false accusations. Detective Rodriguez gathered the documents into neat stacks. Based on what I've seen here, I'm going to recommend that the district attorney's office file charges against Sarah Kellerman for corporate espionage, fraud, attempted theft, and filing a false police report. As we left the police station, David walked beside me in silence. Finally, he spoke. Mom, I owe you an apology. I should have trusted you from the beginning. You trusted your wife, I said. That's what you were supposed to do. The fault here belongs entirely to Sarah. What happens now? I looked at my son, my successful, honorable son who had been manipulated by a professional criminal for 5 years, and felt a profound sense of relief. Now you rebuild your life with people who actually care about you, I said. And I go back to running my businesses without looking over my shoulder for family members who are secretly working against me. 6 months later, Sarah Kellerman was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. David's divorce was finalized without contest, and he kept his house, his business, and his reputation. As for me, I officially announced my ownership of Preston Industries and took active control of all my companies. At 73, I was busier than I'd been in decades, but I was also happier than I'd been in years. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning, it's discovering that you never needed revenge at all. You just needed to stop allowing other people to underestimate you. The day Sarah was sentenced was David and I had dinner at the same restaurant where she'd made her toast about me always being hungry for attention and free food. You know what the ironic thing is? I told David as we raised our glasses in celebration. Sarah was right about me being hungry. I was hungry. hungry for honesty. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.